Good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Katherine Seligman in conversation with Barbara Lane. My name is Jamie Madsen and I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator here at Copperfield's Books, and I'll also be your host for the evening. Copperfield's Books has been committed to literature, education, and creating community together since our founding in 1981. Because event proceeds allow us to provide this free event program, I'd like to take a moment here in the beginning. Thank you all for your continued support. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I will be using the chat box to provide links to view upcoming Copperfields events, links to purchase tonight's title, as well as a 10% discount code for use on our website. And I'll also include my contact details for post-event information. Additionally, the Q&A box will be your go-to tonight with any questions or comments for the speaker. The format will feature between 30 to 40 minutes of speaking and will be followed by a live Q&A. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box rather than replying to my post in the chat box. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see an icon that says Q&A, so it's right there. And without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce tonight's author, Katherine Seligman. Katherine is a journalist and author who lives in our very own San Francisco. She has been a writer at the San Francisco Chronicle magazine, a reporter at the San Francisco Examiner, and a correspondent at USA Today. Her work has appeared in Redbook, Life, Money, California Magazine, the anthology Fresh Takes, as well as many other places. In conversation with Katherine tonight is Barbara Lane. Barbara is the books columnist at the San Francisco Chronicle, and she is also the director of events here at Copperfield's Books. So they are with us tonight to discuss Katherine's debut novel, At the Edge of the Haight. And I know we're all very excited to dive in. So why don't you take it away for us, Barbara?
Good. Thank you, Jamie, and welcome to everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. I am just thrilled to have Katherine with us because I am one of those people who for many years I had stuff to do on Stanton Street, and my son played football at Kezar Stadium. So I walked by that edge of Golden Gate Park, right off Haight Street, and I walked by these young people, and I had no idea who they were. I just didn't. And I had preconceptions about them. And Katherine's book really brings a human face to these young people who are living in the park and its environs. And it's quite remarkable. And I'm just so pleased that we have the opportunity to speak with her tonight. So I know, Katherine, that you've been a resident of the Haight for many, many years, I think over 2 decades. So I'd like to start, could you tell us a little bit about when you first moved into the neighborhood and what it was like then?
I have lived in the neighborhood almost 30 years. And when I first moved in, before I was married, before I had kids, it was a neighborhood even then in transition from the time from which it gets its legacy, Summer of Love, the hippie movement, when kids just thronged here and were on the streets, and the neighborhood was very down and out at that time and actually didn't embrace having the kids, but did get its reputation for being a hospitable place. And over the years, kids have kept coming and could be found going through and living in the park and living on the street. And they were the seekers and dreamers and people you'd expect to come here. But there are also kids who came from really difficult backgrounds. And that only increased as time passed and there are fewer resources for kids like that. So I've seen the neighborhood in San Francisco change in the last 20 years quite dramatically as it became a place that's much less affordable and had far fewer musicians and writers and artists and, more people in the tech industry and the financial sector.
So for those of us who aren't a part of that population and have, as residents of San Francisco or even as tourists, observed the Haight sort of sociologically, it seems that the neighborhood got this there was a description of the neighborhood during the Summer of Love as kind and gentle, which it's arguable if that was ever true in terms of embracing these children, and I'm going to call them children. And my perception over the years, because of course I was drawn to that when I first came to San Francisco, like many people who were my age at the time. But over the years, it seemed to get kind of harder and scarier, at least again, to those of us on the outside. And I know you raised a family. You have 2 adult children now. What was that like, being a parent in the Haight?
Well, we talked about leaving and finding a place that was quieter. We didn't want to leave the city, but it was quieter where you could ride your bike, where, kids could go out by themselves. But we were just both too entrenched in the neighborhood and attached to it. And I actually found that it was a wonderful place to raise kids, as an urban environment often can be. I mean, we had the resources of the park and a wonderful, almost free art program there, and the Natural History Museum, and and the park itself. So it ended up being a great place to raise kids, although for when our kids were little, the house next door was what you'd call a squat. It had been empty, and some formerly homeless people moved in and would sit on the stoop in the morning. They were very friendly. They would ring our doorbell at 6 a.m. if we were going to get a ticket. Yeah, but one of them was a serious meth addict, and the other one would be out there drinking at 9 a.m. And they would wave at my son as he walked off to school and say, keep on mobbing, little buddy. he would wave. But, I think it opened their eyes and made them, just see what some people go through. I think it made them more compassionate adults, to tell you the truth.
In your capacity as a journalist, you covered homelessness and mental illness. So you had a journalist background in these subjects. When you were thinking about writing this book, how did those experiences come to bear on the novel that you wrote in terms of your understanding?
Well, I had talked to a lot of the kids who came through, and I had actually volunteered at a family shelter that was right around the corner for a while. So I'd had the chance to get to know some of the kids, and also in being a reporter to look into court records and talk to the police. And I, sort of got to know the area as you would as a journalist. But I also knew it because I was so entrenched in living here. And San Francisco, as you know, it's just a very neighborhoody place. People really identify with their neighborhood. And this is a very passionate neighborhood. Liberals arguing with liberals, and people care passionately about everything. And that's one of the things I love about it, is that people care so much. But I think having been a reporter just, helped me dive into this book, where it would have been hard to come at this if I hadn't been inside the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there was an incident that spurred you sort of directly to write this book, and it was pretty chilling. So tell us about that incident and how that resulted in the story you tell, An Escape from the Haight.
Well, we were, very settled in the Haight. And
I said Escape from the Haight, not at the edge of the Haight. I don't know if I was thinking of Alcatraz. Excuse me. Okay.
It was about 10 years ago, and we were driving home through Golden Gate Park, which is very dark at night. And a man just appeared and sort of threw himself in front of our car, and he was pleading with us to stop. He said somebody was trying to kill him. He seemed really agitated and kind of out of it, but he was very upset and very adamant that we help him. So we called the police. who came and they shined a light onto the grass nearby, and there was a body there of what turned out to be a kid, 25-year-old kid who died right there. And he had killed this kid. And I just couldn't get that night out of my mind. I mean, we went to the police station. We were talking to the police and they were trying to figure out what happened. But in the end, they never really investigated very thoroughly because there were no witnesses. And I mean, having been there when that kid died really moved me. I just felt like there was some connection, almost like I owed him something. And I really, that was the seed for the book.
Pretty powerful. I know that you have a section to read, and I believe it's from the beginning of the book. So why don't we hear that, and then we'll continue our conversation. This is Katherine Seligman reading from At the Edge of the Haight.
There was no trace of Root, but he knew his way around the park. We all did. I reached in and rattled the brush, which was waist high. Root! He came halfway out, his muzzle crusted with dirt. He looked at me the way he did when he knew he was in trouble. I grabbed for his collar, but missed, and he scrambled back in. I followed him through the brush and into a small clearing, and I kept talking to him. What did he think he was doing? He was crazy. So I didn't see right off what was in front of me. But Root was looking down at a kid lying on the ground, perfectly still, his eyes wide open to the sky. His head was turned a little to one side, his arms spread out as if he was making an angel in the dirt. Root snipped his face and his neck. The kid stuttered in a single long breath, and I stood there watching, holding my own. Root licked his cheek and edged his nose down the kid's chest toward a seeping stain of blood. In the middle, almost hidden, was a tiny slit in his shirt. I couldn't stop looking at the blood, the kid's halo of light brown hair, and for once in 20 years on this earth, I couldn't seem to move. I knew I would see it for the rest of my life. Whenever I closed my eyes, he would be there, his life leaking out on the ground. Maybe it was true what my stand-in of a mother had said. You are going to end up damaged goods. I couldn't help copying her voice. You are going to be sorry, I said to Root and pulled him away from the kid. I wanted to put my hand on his chest to see if it was moving, but I couldn't get myself to do it. My heart was banging against my chest. Who was I going to scream for? Ash and everyone else, they wouldn't hear me. Root startled and growled with his mouth closed, a slow, deep rattle he made when he knew he was on guard. We both looked over at a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He could have been there the whole time waiting, or maybe he'd walked in right in front of us. He was a head taller than me, his black and gray hair pushed back into a stringy ducktail. I had a sweatshirt pulled down over my head, so nothing about me stood out, but Root was something you would remember. He looked like he'd been sewn together. His face soft Labrador, the rest some short, wide pit bull creation. The man stuck his hands in the pockets of his camel pants and stared at us. I tried to stare back, but all I could do was reach for Root, who moved from a muffled growl to an all-out bark. I didn't usually make people nervous, but the man shifted back and forth, crunching sticks and leaves under his boots, which made Root bark louder. The man lunged toward us and then stopped, like he'd forgotten something. I thought how easily he could come after me. No one would know. I'd be lying there next to the kid, and the cops would think we'd done it to each other. It seemed like minutes passed, but it must have been less because neither of us moved. Even Root stood still, his eyes on the man. And then, not thinking where I was headed, I turned and I ran. Root kept up, loping next to me. You heard me, the man yelled after us. I know where to find your ass. I scrambled across the uneven dirt and past some trees until I had to bend in half to gulp air. I listened for the man, but all I could hear was my own quick breath, or maybe it was his, or the wind. I couldn't tell what was real. The carpet of yellow and brown leaves where I stood looked too bright. They smelled sweet but rotten. When I straightened up, my muscles were ready for more, but I couldn't do it. The loop had started playing in my brain of the kid on the ground and the look in the man's eyes. I knew something about getting away. I'd been doing that most of my life, but not like this. No one had tried to stop me when I left the house where I'd lived longer than anywhere else. They had no idea where I was, standing in a park hundreds of miles away, alone in a whole different way. Root whined softly, and I put a finger sternly to my lips, as if he'd know what that meant. Quiet, I mouthed. No one was coming to help. I could run through the park all the way to the ocean, but then where would I go? I turned toward the other direction, which led back to the street, and my body took over and I was running again, pretending I was someone who knew what she was doing.
Wow. So you get right into it. This is from the beginning of the book.
It's from the beginning, it's the very beginning, but yeah, the first chapter.
This horrifying situation that, as you explained, comes directly from your own experience with a man jumping in front of your car. So the I that tells the story here is Maddy, your central character, and she's told us a little bit about herself, that she's left home and she's on her own with her dog Root. Tell us a little bit more about Maddy and why you made her the central character.
She has grown up in Los Angeles and has fled her life there in foster care with relatives who weren't really, she'd never knew. And just a life where nobody went from being with parents who couldn't care for her to a life where nobody saw her, nobody knew who she was, nobody treated her with any kindness, and ends up in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park with kind of a group of kids who are almost like a new family, who she assembles around herself. A dog that she finds on the street and takes, because she does have a habit of taking things. So that's sort of, what has precipitated her coming to San Francisco with this idea, which a lot of kids do, that she will somehow find what she needs there, that she will be able to live. And she does survive in the park until she comes across this murder.
Right. So family and making your own family is so much what we learn about and experience in this novel. So many people coming from families that either didn't care or cared too much, which is not to say that there aren't people who came who had perfectly lovely families, but they were rebelling, or they had a mental illness in some cases, or substance abuse. We start with the dog Root, and as somebody who, as I said, has observed these young people in the park for many, many years, what is it with the dogs? I mean, almost to a person, you see a dog, and I'm reminded of a movie I saw recently called Lucy and Amy. Lucy and anyway, about a young homeless woman and a dog. What is it about the dogs?
Well, the dogs do provide a kind of comfort, and you often see the kids just so devoted to the dogs. You see sometimes neglect or even abuse, but usually you just see this incredible love for an attachment to a dog. And it didn't, when I first moved here, this wasn't, you didn't see as many animals. And now it's amazing. People, almost everyone who comes through has a dog, sometimes two. There was a woman not too long ago, it was right before the pandemic, who was living on our corner in a car, and she had 12 dogs in her car. She had 9 puppies and 3 adult dogs. And she didn't want to give up. I mean, she adored these dogs. She didn't want to give them up. It's it's really this connection. And in Maddy's case, I think the only being who she can trust. People are too unpredictable. A dog, by seeing her relationship with the dog, it's sort of more of a way into her, to see her and who she is. She can't express that to the humans around her. They're too untrustworthy.
The movie I was thinking of, by the way, is called Wendy and Lucy, and it was in my mind as I was reading your book. So the young man who is killed, and we learn this at the very beginning of the book, his name is Shane. And another big part of the book is Shane's parents who come to San Francisco to learn. They don't know what happened to their son, and they don't know why. And anybody who is a parent or has had parents has to feel their enormous pain and grief and their just desires, their hunger to learn about what happened to their son. These are parents who are the opposite of Maddy's parents and the parents of many of the children you find in the park. So tell us why you thought it was important to introduce Shane's parents and that whole world into the story.
Well, it's partly because when I saw that kid dying and then saw how little attention it got, and then subsequently, I mean, I think I knew this, but in researching, find out how many people die on the streets and in the park every year, which incidentally in 2017 was over 300. Yeah. what it just, I kept thinking, because my kids were at home then, I just kept thinking, well, what would it be like? What does a parent go through? And of course, I had talked to parents who'd come to San Francisco, whose kids had been here. I had read about a father who came here because his son actually died in the Tenderloin of a drug overdose. But he just felt like, this father felt like he had to come and walk those streets and see where his son slept and see where he had died, because he just needed to know. And I felt like that would be how I would feel. I could really understand how those parents just needed to come out here to find out what happened to their son, even though it was pretty impossible to find out what had happened. They just had this need to do it. And they didn't understand what had gone on with him. Why had their kid, who they loved so much, how could he possibly have left town all the way on the East Coast, traveled across the country, and ended up dead in the park? They just, so it seemed like a way into the story.
What's interesting to me in your book is, as in life, there are no real heroes and no real villains. Nobody's totally good or totally bad. Shane, the young man who dies, who we never know except through his parents, is not an angel. Nor is Maddy an angel, for that matter. I mean, we root for her, but she doesn't always behave well. As you said, she likes to take things. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciated that about your book, because it's so easy to see these characters, these people in black and white. And thank you for not doing that. It made it much more realistic. The other thing that had occurred to me reading your book, and I never really understood this, people often think of the homeless, any homeless, as kind of just lying around and lazing around. Homelessness is a full-time job, at least in San Francisco, where we have a sit-lie ordinance. Can you talk about that and the life of one of these young people constantly having to move?
Yeah, that's one of the things that really surprised me was how much work it was, spending time with some of the kids, getting if they sleep in the park, they have to they get awakened before dawn by the park police or the national park, the Golden Gate Park rangers, and told that they must get up. There's no camping or sleeping in the park. So they will get up and they go across the street or just get up and stumble and lean against a tree. And the cops sort of know that that's what they're doing, and they know what they're doing, but it's just this thing that they have to do. And then that starts off the day. of then, are they going to get back and get some more sleep? Where are they going to get food? Where are they going to use the bathroom? Where are they going to get their food during the day? Just constantly this thing in motion. And it's this cat and mouse thing with the police, or it was pre-pandemic, that the police didn't want to arrest them. And they knew they weren't going to go anywhere. And if they did, what's the point? They would just go a few blocks away and sit on the street there and then come back. So it's a tremendous amount of work to manage to forage for your food. There are services, but they're crowded. You can't you can't be sure that you'll get a place in a shelter, even if you want to be inside. So it's just this constant sense of not knowing what's going to happen. And the kids, people have said, well, there are choices that people make, and to some extent that's true, but they have these each kid has different issues that he or she is facing. So it's not as easy as just going into a program, of which there aren't a lot, but it's a complicated issue.
You mentioned the shelters, and I'm sure everybody's been thinking, but what about the shelters? And you said that there aren't enough places, but also for many of the people living outdoors, the shelters are really undesirable. Why is that?
Well, because they come with, they come with a lot of rules. You have to be there at a certain time to line up. And if you don't line up at exactly the right time, you won't get a spot. And if you get a spot, you're going to be told where to sleep and what to do. And then you have to get up very early in the morning and leave. It's just a place to sleep. It does come with a certain number of rules. I mean, the shelter spot is just for you. You can't bring in your friends. And a lot of them have very strict rules about drinking or smoking marijuana or doing anything that they don't allow. And that's a very difficult situation for a kid to accept. And even if it is available, it's these are not it. And there's a certain amount of danger there. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen at the shelter for these young kids. So, it's not always a great option for them, even when it is available. And San Francisco's been experimenting with these things called navigation centers, where they'll let a group of people come in and you can bring your animal, but you can't bring your dog to a shelter usually. But there aren't enough spots there. So they're just, it's a question of not being enough resources to solve the problems.
We need to talk about drugs and substance abuse because it figures prominently in your book, and it's a big part of life in the park for these young people. What did you experience as you were doing your research? What did you see?
Well, a lot of the kids said there was a lot of smoking weed and a lot of drinking. For the most part, most of them, some of them had substance abuse issues, but I wouldn't say, and I'm not an expert on this, but I would say the ones, that I'd spoken to, the majority did not use hard drugs. And they often would make that point to me that they didn't use hard drugs and that people in other places use drugs. And when the pandemic hit and people were coming into the neighborhood from other places, some of them were complaining to me that, the people on that side of the street in their tents, they're selling and using, and we don't do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the truth is. Yes, a number of them, there's a lot of smoking of weed and psychedelics, a lot of mushrooms and acid, and there's a lot of substance use, which I think makes it more palatable to be outside at night with the coyotes and the raccoons and everything else that's happening. I think it all, that plays into it as well.
Did you get emotionally involved with any of the people you met when you were researching this book who were living in the park? Or did you have to keep a really strong barrier between you and them in terms of personal life?
Well, I did try to I had boundaries, although, my husband would probably say not enough, since he's he used to be he now does other medical work, but he used to be a ER doctor. And I have, over the years run upstairs and said, oh my God, there's, somebody bleeding, or there's someone unconscious. You have to come down and help. And he always does. But I just, yeah, I mean, I tried to keep my boundaries because I thought that was the best way to do research too. There were a couple young women who I spoke to a lot. And as I said, I didn't use either of their stories in any way, but I could ask them questions about, they both lived in the park for around 2 years. And so I could really ask them about what this felt like, and what happened when this happened, and what happened with that, when that happened. But that said, when I met them, I would always meet them in a cafe, and I would offer to buy them lunch and anything I could. But I didn't want the sense that I was, overstepping my bounds, or that I was paying them for information. So yeah, it was, that was something I had to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from an audience member who says, thanks for your wonderful book, Katherine. I'm curious to know what kinds of truth you think fiction can convey that journalism can't. We clearly need both, but having written both, which best conveys the reality of living in the Haight?
Well, I think both can equally. I chose fiction because what I wanted to write about really was how little we know about the people who live so close to us. We walk by people all the time on the street, sometimes in our own houses, and we think we know them, but we don't. And I just wanted to write about those being in such proximity and not really understanding who the other person is. And I felt like if I had the constraint of nonfiction, I would be writing about who this kid was and where he came from, and interviewing his parents. And that would have been interesting, but it wasn't what I wanted to write about. I really wanted to write about how this could have happened, sort of in a bigger way.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question. Are homeless girls in the Haight trafficked?
Good. That's a good question. In my experience of the girls I talked to, what often happens is that they become attached to somebody who they might be with them for 2 nights a week, and they refer to the man as my husband. I ran into this over and over again, because a young girl staying here usually needs a man to help protect her, because it's not safe. I mean, I ran into this one young woman who, she was sleeping on top of everything she owned, a guitar, all of her clothes, any food she had, because she said if she didn't, it would get stolen from her at night. And she very soon after that got involved with a guy who was also just there, and she would call him her husband, and he would call her his wife. So I think they were there for protection. There may be cases of trafficking, but this is not a neighborhood where that happens. This is, the population in the Haight is sort of its own group of kids, and tends to be very different from people that end up homeless in other parts of the city, who have faced much more dire backgrounds and trauma. Of course, I will add that one of the young women who I spoke to had a horrific background of being trafficked elsewhere, and had grown up in foster care, and had escaped from that and ended up here. But in the Haight, she was free from that.
Here's another question. Did you find that young homeless kids end up forming groups, like in the book? is this true of older homeless people in the city as well? Until reading your book, I thought of being homeless as a very solitary experience.
Well, it is true that the kids tend to come through and form little families. And I got to know, several of them. And they also tend to go by their street names to the extent that when they get arrested, if they get arrested, their street names are in court records. That's how they're referred to. But they do, and they have a remarkable amount of affection for each other and support, and do really lean on each other. And sometimes they didn't know each other's backgrounds. It was really interesting what they knew and what they didn't know. There was one day when I was eating with a young woman and a friend of hers, and she lived in the park alongside him for a long time. And she would be telling me things about her background, and he'd say, I didn't know that. And, it kind of surprised me, but you could see how affectionate they were with each other. They were not, romantically, they're not partners, but they were like family to each other.
Mm-hmm. So I haven't mentioned yet, but I should, that this book won the Bellwether Prize. And the Bellwether Prize was established, I believe, by the fabulous Barbara Kingsolver. And tell us a little bit about the prize and what it means.
She developed it about, she gives it every other year. And she came up with it because she had written Poisonwood Bible and saw that there was this huge barrier in the publishing industry, specifically for books about social issues. And those were things that she was writing about. And when she had so much success with Poisonwood Bible, she decided to put some of her time, energy, and money into trying to help and support writers who were writing books that dealt with social issues. And so she developed this prize 20 years ago, and they read the submissions, as many contests do, blind. So they don't know who you are or where you come from or your age. So she just, and she's been doing it. And it was an incredible gift to me that helped bring this book out into the world.
How does that work?
Well, it comes with a publishing contract with Algonquin. So the biggest gift was, well, aside from her calling me one day when I was at a cafe and my cell phone rang, and it was Barbara Kingsolver saying, telling me that I'd won this award. But the editor at Algonquin is working with her with such a wonderful experience and really helped me solve some of the problems that the book had. Not all of them, but as many as she could help solve. And
did you apply for the prize?
Yes, you apply for the prize, and then it's, they read the manuscript without knowing who you are, and then, notify you. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience to have her want to help the book and make notes about it as well, and then to work with this editor who really was great. And just, it's really amazing to have an editor who will kind of get into the sandbox with you. It really believes in the characters and is asking questions that, that only somebody who's so engaged in the plot would ask. That was really, one of the most wonderful things about this prize, this gift.
Trying to wrap my head around being a debut novelist and getting the phone call from Barbara Kingsolver. I mean, that's just we all, those of us who are passionate about reading Barbara Kingsolver as this goddess, and for her to choose you and then have all of this that helps your book come into the world is pretty fabulous.
It was quite amazing. I did, when she first called, I did think it was one of those robo calls, like
Right.
that was asking for money or something. So
and we all, no matter where we live, but I speak specifically as somebody who lived for many years in San Francisco, understand, well, feel that the homeless issue is somewhat intractable. I mean, so many things have been tried. So many people have come up with ways to solve it, and yet, do you come out of your experience immersing yourself in this with any kind of hopefulness? Or do you just feel like it ain't ever going to get better?
well, I think that it's really a problem that's bigger than San Francisco or even than California. So San Francisco spends a lot of money and has a lot of creative people trying to think up solutions. Not all of them that are approved of by everyone. I mean, there's so much argument about what we should do, and are we throwing money at the problem and wasting the money, or should we, I mean, if it was easy to do, Gavin Newsom would have done it when he was mayor. That's what he said, we are going to solve this problem. And I don't think, things have only gotten worse. I mean, the UN has said that, Commission on Human Rights has said that what's going on in San Francisco is a human rights violation. So, you don't see this anywhere else in the Western world. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a reason for that. It's we see it. I mean, it's Los Angeles has an even larger problem.
And what is the reason? You say there's a reason for it. What's the reason for it?
For why we have this problem? Well, I mean, I personally think that it's because there are too few resources at the beginning. I mean, if families were supported and there was less breaking up of families when there was a crisis that happened, that would go a long way towards helping people. If I mean, if there were certain safeguards, if people got a higher minimum wage, I think all those things would go a long way towards helping. I just think that, it's gotten to be such a huge problem. And also, once it becomes this thing that's sort of here, we get used to it. And that was, one of the things that really motivated me too about the novel is that, myself included, we can walk through San Francisco and just sort of cross the street because, there are 50 people lying on the sidewalk. I mean, I don't know if anyone's been to Skid Row in Los Angeles lately, but that is so shocking. I mean, that we could live and, not feel that it's such a crisis, that these are human beings that deserve more. We just can get used to it. I mean, we do get used to it. So but it's a shocking thing. I mean, it still should shock us. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to feel like, they walk down the street and every single person they see that they have to open their wallet or, but we do have to recognize what a crisis it is.
Well, I would think, in fact, I'm sure that the merchants on Haight Street, who have these kids sitting in front of their businesses, often to ill effect, often feel a little bit less generous about how to deal with the issue. Or am I wrong?
Well, I some do and some don't. Some are, yeah. I mean, if kids are, and particularly during the pandemic, if people are in front of your business and you're not, you're almost out of business, the hate, yeah, you don't know what to do. It's not a question of what side of the political fence you're on. It's just, you have a right to operate your business. And but on the other hand, the problem's so large. If these people are relocated, where are they going to go? They're going to be in front of somebody else's business or somebody else's house. It's been the merchants, for the most part, those that are still here, I think there are as many as 30 merchants on Haight Street, the whole length of Haight Street, that have gone out of business. So, and, a lot of them have just, they've left, they can't make a living here anymore, like in a lot of neighborhoods during the pandemic. But the homelessness issue has really been a difficult one for them to deal with. And since we're, at a wonderful independent bookstore, the bookstore in my neighborhood, which shows up in the book, The Booksmith, has been really at the forefront of trying to help. The owner of the bookstore has 5 days a week on her own time volunteers with the Coalition on Homelessness and works on behalf of people who are 50 and older, most of them 50 and older, downtown, case by case by case with other people, to try to get each person into some kind of emergency housing. And that it's kind of amazing because she also has a business to run.
This is Kristen Evans, who has done. She it's remarkable, and I know that this has been a real passion for her.
Yes.
And she has rolled up her sleeves and gotten to work, and it's so commendable. It's just unbelievable. Because she could have taken a totally different direction. You did mention the Booksmith, and I too, through my work for Copperfields and my life as a book lover, feel really strongly about independent bookstores and what they mean in our communities. And as you know, Copperfields puts on these programs free because we want to get these voices out there. And even during the pandemic, we scrambled to present people like you and many others for our community, because it's important. And I just want to say, and I hope you'll add your voice, excuse me, that it's important to us that people buy a book from us. I know it's easy to watch this program and go buy a book on Amazon, but that just isn't plain fair. We really need to keep these bookstores like the Booksmith and people like Kristen thriving, because that's what makes a community.
Right. I so agree with that. And plus, now that the bookstores, most of them are, if have the resources, are open for browsing as well. Now you can even go into a bookstore. But yes, I think we need to support them, but there's nothing like them. I mean, in finding books that you want to read, and being in a bookstore and being able to say to somebody who works in the bookstore, I just finished this book, what do you think I should read next? I mean, I think all of us who go to independent bookstores ask that question at least once, probably more than once. And I'm a total advocate for independent bookstores. And now that you can go in and just smell the books again, it's absolutely amazing. But I would definitely add my voice to yours in support for independent bookstores. And I was in an event recently, not my own event, one for someone else, where someone said, every time I went to the bookstore before the pandemic, every time I got to the cash register, I realized that I'd spent $75. He said, I don't know what it is with this $75, but everyone who goes into an independent bookstore and doesn't spend $75 is, morally a failure. I can't claim that for myself.
So if you're watching us tonight, you know what you have to do. Katherine Seligman, thank you. And we didn't even talk about your writing process. We didn't. I just was so involved in the subject and your experience. So all of you who are disappointed about that, I'm sorry that I didn't do that. But Thank you for your book. It's really, really important. And thank you for being so generous with your time. And I can't wait to see what you're going to do next. Can you tell us, or are you not sure what?
No, I can say, I just also want to thank you for hosting me, and to Copperfields for doing this.
Our pleasure.
Keeping these lively events open and free to the public. And I'm working on another novel, which is completely different. And it was actually an earlier novel that I'm going back to, proving that most people who publish a novel, it's not their first novel. So this I will go back to.
Well, we can't wait to see it. So thank you. And thanks again to everybody who's been with us tonight. We hope we see you again at one of our events soon. Check our website, and I'm going to throw it back to Jamie.
Well, thank you. You both summed it up perfectly. And for everyone else, you know the drill. Tomorrow you'll get the email with all of the links to purchase tonight's title, the discount code, a link to the recording. And we hope to see you back real soon. So thank you both, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.